Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everyone to the full commission meeting of the Northampton Policing Review Commission. This is a meeting that is being recorded and is on Zoom as an open meeting. And the first order of business is to call the roll.
Booker. Maybe not yet. Dan.
Yep, here.
Nick.
Here.
David. Not yet here. Alex.
Here.
Javier.
Here.
Namdi.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Cynthia.
Here.
Carol.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
And Elizabeth, who is not yet here. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Noah. First order of business is we have two sets of minutes from the February 9th meeting and the February 16th meeting. Can we do them together? Is that okay with everyone? And any comments, any changes? Alex?
As there's two paragraphs at the end of the February 16th meeting that after the adjournment that I think were left there by mistake. I spoke to Noah about it, but I just want to have, I think we can amend those now to remove those.
Yep, thank you for pointing that out. And I made a couple changes as well. They were just in attendance, so those have been amended as I understand. Any other comments on the minutes for the 9th and the 16th? And if not, could we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Dan. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Alex. And we'll do that roll call one more time.
Awesome. Booker, not here yet. Dan.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
David is not here. Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Namdi.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Josie.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's okay. Cynthia.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
And Elizabeth is not here yet. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Noah. So the minutes are approved, and we will now move to the public comment section of our meeting. We'll do public comment this evening for a period of 15 minutes, and we ask that anyone who wants to make a comment to raise your hand in reactions, and I will call on you in the order that the hands are raised. And you will have 3 minutes to provide us with your comment. And just to remind folks that we cannot respond back to you if you pose a question to us. So it'll be 3 minutes of your comment. And let me take a look and see if we have any comments, any raised hands at all. Am I missing something? Oh, I thought I would. I see Jose A. Jose A. Thank you, Jose. Yeah, you good? You unmuted?
Hi.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for your time. I'm sort of here to, play the same record that I have been playing. And, most recently, the most recent sort of insult to the community has, it's not really recent because, this officer has had a public record of having lawsuits filed against him, but there was just a article published. Andrew Cole is one of 5 officers named in a high-profile civil lawsuit for his systematic intimidation and retaliation against a brown and indigenous houseless resident of Northampton. He has a history of violence and misconduct, including the unlawful search and arrest of a former judge. Another arrest in which Cole repeatedly punched and pepper sprayed a suspect in what he claims was self-defense, and a restraining order against him, wherein the judge who granted it ruled that Cole posed an immediate danger of abuse to his victim. So, you know, I know that some people are open to submitting to allowing the current police department to keep operating, but this department is full of people like this, and there's nothing that the chief can do about it. I recommend completely abolishing this department, and if the state is going to force us to have police, these people can't be the people with guns that live around me, that patrol me, and that have authority of my life. Who would want that? This guy arrested a judge. He's out of his mind. He has a record of intimidating people. And this is, again, what we've been fighting against for years. You know, yesterday I drove by 3 cruisers that were just sitting around waiting for people to pass by speeding while I was putting someone up in a hotel and buying them an Uber and dinner because their house got wet and they're being harassed out there in the parking lot. In there, you know, and those people in the apartment have come down. They've thrown stuff at their trailers and tents. They yell at them. They try to coax them into harassment. The cops know about it. The cops go, they yell at the people in the apartment to leave them alone, but they don't watch all the time, and they don't care. You know, they want the people that live here to file harassment claims so that they can arrest the houseless folks. That's what they're trying to get. And once in a while, one cop will say, you guys need to go back into your house or something like that. You know, the gem or whatever of the department. But for the most part, you know, they have no defense. So, you know, while I drive by these people, you know, putting them in a safe place, driving by the police who are getting paid handsomely, you know, with all this gear, they're not helping anybody. They're not protecting anybody. And we're out here paying for it ourselves. Okay. And that's how it's going to be.
Jose.
And
Sorry to
everybody in
interrupt
the
you.
community is going to put their resources into it until we get some help.
Thank you, Jose. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay. Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else who would like to speak in public comment? And I'm seeing Sean. Sean?
Hey everyone, this is Sean. I'm actually part of Ward 3 in Northampton, and that's where I live, but I'm actually still at work in Holyoke right now. And I've definitely spoken at this commission meeting before. First of all, I just want to say thank you all for continuing to be in this process. I know this is a lot of nights, more than I've been here, that you have all been here. But yeah, I wanted to echo some of what Jose was just saying. You know, I just donated some money to HRH 413, which does a lot of mutual aid and support work for not just drug users, but also people that are houseless. And because of the winds, I know that some tent encampments have been demolished and ruined. So they're trying to raise money. I saw a published list of the highest paid public servants in Holyoke, where I'm sitting at the moment, the other day, and it was upwards of $200,000 for many police officers. And I'm wondering if y'all have uncovered the salaries for Northampton police. I'm sure it's similar. And it just made me think of how much people like Jose and I and other people that are doing mutual aid work on the ground could do with that money. And so I just wanted to make a pitch, you know, regardless of what happens with this commission, if the city actually takes it seriously or not, the report that y'all have been working so hard on, like, I want to make a pitch that we still find ways to connect with each other after this commission is over, because just because the city does or doesn't, you know, sort of validate the work of this commission, like, people are going to still be in need. And I know all of you know that. I'm not trying to like moralize to y'all, But I just feel like there are organizations like Jose mentioned, and like I'm trying to give attention to, that are already doing the work. They're already doing the abolitionist work because people are not being supported. So I just feel I have a lot of hopes for the imagination of what like people in need can think about like doing with the money that could be placed into like a community, community care department or whatever. But just like there's just so much more we could be doing, and I just see this happening, even today, like people even without the funds, like making amazing efforts to collect money to people that need it today. And so I would really love to see Northampton prioritize that from the top down, as a lot of people have been sharing in this commission rather. Yeah, so just wanted to share that, I'm someone who's a Northampton resident and spending what little money I have to support people that the city is not helping. And so I would really love to see like our city playing more of a role in just addressing things as needed. And I know really deeply appreciate all of your work. And I also know that commissions sometimes are the way of cities not taking responsibility for doing the work. And so I really hope that the mayor and the city council really listens to what y'all and what we have said, that gets into the report. But if not, like, I hope you continue to show up in different ways, whether that's
Thank
like
you.
donating or otherwise.
Thank
So
you, Sean.
thank you, Cynthia. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off there. Let's see, anyone else for public comment? Public comment. Anyone else? And if anyone is seeing anyone that I might be missing for some reason, please let me know.
Hi, Cynthia. This is Jess Tilley. I just
Yes.
joined.
Thank you, Jess. Will, thank you very much. Will, thank you for coming, and we'll introduce you. You'll have some time to speak with us?
Yes.
Okay, super, great. Okay, thank you. We'll just hold, we'll introduce you, and we're just finishing public comment right now.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if you wanted me for public comment or later.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll take you a little bit later, but thank you so much for coming. I know you've been very, very busy.
Thank you.
So I am seeing no one else for public comment. So I would like to close public comment at this time and move to the next agenda item, which is speakers. Just wanted to see if any of the subcommittees had speakers that they wanted to entertain. I know the policy committee had a representative from CSO, Community Support Options, this past week. But if there is anyone else, I think we felt that it would be better to have speakers in the subcommittees as opposed to the full commission, because we were kind of running out of time. And we do have a speaker tonight who just arrived. So any thoughts about that? Anybody want to weigh in about more speakers as we finish up our work? Okay, I think we'll just move on, but I know we're trying to get another speaker in policies, which is the head of the dispatch, the emergency dispatch office, but we haven't heard a response from that individual yet. So, okay, seeing none. Dan, you've had some interaction with Jess, and I'm happy Jess is here. I didn't know if she needed an introduction or framing of this, because we weren't sure if you were going to come. Jess Tilley from HRH 413. Dan, did you have anything you wanted to lay some groundwork on for Jess's presentation?
So I think what's important is that Jess has done a lot of work with HRH 413, and it's doing direct work with people who need assistance across a wide variety of needs. She's spoken to the alternatives to policing in a brief public comment, but we wanted to expand that. We also wanted to hear from Hampshire Hope. We haven't been able to get someone to come speak with us from their group, but we do have Jess here tonight, which is going to be great. So we'll have a short description. Jess, if you can tell us really briefly about sort of what you do, the Cliff Notes version, the highlights version, and let us know about other city organizations or things that you do within Northampton. And then we'll open this up to sort of questions from commissioners.
And just to interject here, Jess, we want to stay close to the time. So, maybe 5-10 minutes, you could tell us what you do, and then the commissioners can ask you some questions if that sounds good, and I'll be the timekeeper. So anytime you're ready, Jess.
Sure, and I am a quite lengthy speaker, so I'll keep it short. So, and I apologize, my camera's off. I'm actually in the midst of putting people into inclement weather temporary shelter, so I don't want to ruin anyone's anonymity, so my camera is off. My name is Jess Tilley, and I've worked in harm reduction, the field of harm reduction, for over 25 years. Recently returned back to the Valley about 8 years ago and started a fiscally funded grassroots harm reduction program, or agency rather, called HRH 413, which stands for Harm Reduction Hedgehogs, because I raise hedgehogs. We essentially work with marginalized populations who cannot or will not, and I really emphasize will not, access brick and mortar traditional service providers, and especially because of the amount of stigma and discrimination they've experienced in this area. When I first came back, I've been running a program, a Department of Public Health funded program in Cambridge, and had been doing frontline service provision for nearly 10 years there. And when I returned back to this area, I noticed a huge discrepancy in the quality of services that had been here when I was here in the 90s. So we oversee outreach teams. We have 6 outreach teams that cover primarily Hampshire County, but also the Berkshires and Hampden County. We do everything from, there's an uptick in HIV right now. We do HIV testing, Hep C testing, referrals to detox, to treatment, whether it be for an STI, whether it be for Hep C. We do everything from transportation to literally sitting in the waiting room with people, because we know that it's because of the medical provision has been so horrific in this area. People are terrified to go in and even get an abscess treated. We do housing when we can. We rely a lot on public mutual aid, public donations. Like tonight, just with donations alone, we were able to get, it'll be 16 people into rooms for 2 nights. And we also oversee an overdose response team, because the one the police were running with Hampshire Oak was not very successful, as we talk to people on the ground. That's not me saying that, this is coming from our participants. We're very challenged working with the post-overdose response team. So we respond to overdoses where, again, 911 will not be called. It's not that it cannot be called. There is a Good Samaritan law. So far, we've had 96 successful overdose reversals. We haven't lost anybody. And 78% of post-overdose, we were able to get people into treatment and work with the families following up with treatment. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on about what we do, but that's in a nutshell what we do. We also do trainings. I also do Narcan trainings. My co-founder does Narcan trainings. Our outreach workers do Narcan trainings. And we also work with parents in a program called From Parent to Advocate, helping parents become immersed in harm reduction. And really, because when somebody is, has a substance use disorder, it doesn't just affect that person, it affects the whole family. So we really do the work of actually literally sitting in the living room, although with COVID, it's been a little bit harder, and working through the nuances of a substance use disorder with families. So I don't want to go over. I'll keep talking, and I know it's 6:23.
Well, just thank you so much. And I'm sure there's commissioners here that would like to pose some questions and clarification. And so I'll just call on individuals as they raise their hand, if that's okay with you. And we'll go from there. So right now I'm seeing Nick, who would like to say something. Nick.
Hi, Jess. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Can you tell me, does your program have a relationship with the other programs that that I hear about, like Tapestry. There's also a program at Cooley Dickinson Hospital. Forget what it's called, something like the People's Place or something like that, run by Betsy Shelley Jensen. Can you tell me a little bit about, how people would call your program versus one of these others?
So as you were asking the question, I was like, what is the proper way to say this? Were you thinking of Positive Place? The program?
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
So
I'm sorry.
I will say we work with Positive Place because we do work with a lot of people who are HIV positive in the area. Again, though, that is one of the programs we've gotten a massive amount of complaints about. I'm torn because I like a lot of the people that work there, but there's like this disconnect with the community that we serve. Same holds true for Tapestry. We work with Tapestry, so I'm actually very good friends with the director and with many of the program managers there. However, being on the ground and with the people we provide services for, it tends that people seem to come more to our program. And I think, again, that's because all of our outreach workers are people with lived experience, so they tend to connect better. And they're out there on the streets every day, literally, like, meeting people where they're at. That's a term you hear a lot of harm reduction agencies say, but they don't actually, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. We are actually out there on a regular basis, whether it be walking into homeless camps, whether it be like showing up at a request by a parent to come meet with their child. That's the difference in our agency. I came up in harm reduction when harm reduction was first being introduced in the United States. So my mentors are people like Dan Bigg, who originally brought Narcan to the United States. And I was taught that this is the way that we do our work, that we support people's, we give people the tools to empower themselves to make positive choices. And so, again, with Tapestry, like I have positive things to say about Tapestry. I have negative things to say. And, the negative things are more based on the protocol and kind of the lack of connection. And it depends what site. Like, I love the site in Holyoke. I think they do amazing work. Northampton, to be totally honest, I'm heartbroken because that's where I first started working in harm reduction, and it's not the same program. And I hope that didn't make me any enemies on the council committee.
Can I just ask, do you use the other?
Just very quickly, because we have a couple of other people that want to talk as well. But
sorry, Cynthia, go ahead. Sorry.
If that's okay, I'll circle back to you. Yeah. We have David and Dan.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing what HRH 413 does. I am embarrassed to say that that I wasn't familiar with it. And if you would, before you leave us tonight, maybe through the chat, tell us how one can make a donation to HRH 413. But my question is this, and all of the commissioners know that this is kind of one of the things I've been harping on week after week, is I'm trying to stay focused here. There are many, many social problems that exist all over Western Massachusetts. We are not going to solve them all. I'm trying to stay focused on police response. And my question for you is, could you envision your organization being in a position where you would be available to respond to 911 calls as an alternative to a police response or in conjunction with a police response? I suspect you're going to tell me that you're not equipped to do that right now, but is it something that HRH 413 would be willing to do, interested in doing? Tell me your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. You just asked what my dream is for HRH 413. And I had actually written the best practices for alternative response for post overdose. This is going 10 years back, but we actually are in a position where we can do that. When I was describing what we do as far as 911 calls, what I envisioned for HRH 413 when Albee Park and I started this was working in conjunction, not so much with the police, but being allowed to be the response for an overdose. I mean, obviously, when an overdose happens, I mean, like I said, we reversed over, well, 96 now. Obviously, if somebody's calling 911, you know, the EMS teams aren't going to send us, but we want to be the ones that when somebody is revived from an overdose, that they see our face, not somebody in a uniform standing over them. And, you know, I have worked with LEAD in the past. There are ways of doing this. There is policy in place that we can work, you know, I say with the police, but not necessarily with the police, but beside the police in tandem for the most optimum outcome. You know, so this is something that I wanted to do. This is when DART was created. Had it been unrolled the way it should have been, harm reductionists taking the lead, it would have been very successful. Unfortunately, it didn't play out that way.
Dan?
So,
Oh, sorry, Jess.
no, I was saying I hope I answered that. So yes, I see that we can do it, and I am very willing to do it. I won't take up the time laying out how it can be done, but we could always talk about that at a later point because there are successful models across the country. And I forgot to mention, I also have been doing mobile crisis response for 20 years too, and that is a very big part of it. So.
And I just want to, Dan, I'll call on you next. I just want to remind folks, I know a lot of folks came in after we started the meeting, and so I just wanted to remind folks that public comment is over. And so the commissioners are asking questions to Jess right now. So Dan, you're next.
Yeah, you sort of answered what my question was going to be. So I was going to follow up on David to ask about, I know you said that people didn't go to certain services and they went to you, which I think is really important to think about what makes people trust or want to use services. So would your affiliation with the city, if there was like a way for you to officially work with the city in some capacity responding to those, would that impact sort of people's willingness to come to you? So thinking about that, and then also what would you, thinking about the way that you operate now, your current organizational model, or even an ideal model later on, what would you need in terms of resources, or where do you see opportunities to connect with the city?
So I am very much in favor of working with the city. And as was said before, when someone said they were embarrassed they hadn't heard of us, this is on my part, and our part is because we stayed so low to the ground, very underground, and because we built trust with our participants. And there is a history, you know, I'm not going to take up everyone's time and talk about it, but where there was a lot of ego and self-congratulatory behavior going on, and we wanted no part of it. And we were kind of pushed out of Northampton but we found that people were coming to us. And so we decided to go for funding because we didn't have the bandwidth to provide the services that were being asked of. So we would love to work with the city. And I don't think it would have a negative effect on the marginalized communities we work with, because there has been so many years of building up that trust, and our reputation is word of mouth. I can't tell you how many parents call me on a weekly basis. I say parents because it's a lot of parents that I get phone calls from. It is also other loved ones, but not so much. I mean, like I mentioned, it is the families that are affected, but it's the people who are using drugs themselves that reach out to us. You know, even 10 minutes ago, I just put 2 people in detox, and they're people who not many people know they use drugs, and they trust me, both of them, implicitly, to tell me what's going on and to be honest and to ask for help. And that was why I was a little bit late to the meeting too. It's just getting them in an Uber and up to the detox. And that's what we do. We do it 24/7, you know, for what we need. And this is another reason people haven't heard of us. with the funding we have received, which is very little, we had the choice of getting an office and with all the bells and whistles, or actually using the money to pay people to do outreach. And we chose the latter. But for anyone who does, and this is what I think a lot of the agencies in the area lack, we need a drop-in center. We need a resource center, a drop-in center where people, we do have the recovery center here in town, but there's a sign on the door that says if you're high, you're not welcome here, essentially. And harm reductionists are told they can't be recovery coaches by the person in charge. And so there's this whole disconnect again, and like that, to me, that's heartbreaking. HR 413 runs a national it's a mutual aid group harm reduction called Harm Reduction Works. It's on virtually online now, but we tried to do a meeting in person there, but people didn't feel comfortable coming in there. So having our own space would be amazing. Like our first HRW meeting we held in town, parents came, frontline workers, nurses, people who use drugs. It was like the amount of grief in that room was heartbreaking. So having something like that, and also having a mobile services, like being able to have even a van to be able to bring people food, as we're starting to like work with other programs in the area, like Mana Kitchen is offered to like give our outreach workers meals, but we can only carry so much. So those are the things like we would love if, like, when I have my blue sky list, that's my blue sky list.
Javier?
You hear me? Can you hear me? Well, thank you so much. I have Dan took away my question, so I was thinking in the meantime what I'm going to ask. So you mentioned a drop-in center, right? The city is proposing the resilience hub with a drop-in center. Will that work for this purpose, or is something different necessary?
So I feel like there is something different that should be necessary, because again, what we do is just a little bit different. In so many of these already existing programs, like, and I am familiar, like are you talking about like the warming shelter, the resilience center?
Yep.
Okay, so they're doing, I mean, that's a pretty good model right now, but there's already been pushback with some of the things that like I wanted to bring into there, and not pushback. I shouldn't say pushback. There hasn't been any negativity, but what we envision, what I have run in different cities, is wholly different, because the majority of the population we will see here in Northampton is going to be people who are using drugs, dually diagnosed, who kind of need their own space where they don't feel the need to have to skew their narrative. Their narrative is already set with our outreach workers. They don't have to lie. They don't have to be disingenuous about who they are to procure our services. Does that make sense? Like even having simple things like I was hoping the shelter might put in cots so people could rest, not fall asleep, but rest. Being out in the streets is tiresome. I know even as an outreach worker, when I'm out there 3 hours on my feet, I'm tired. And it was like, well, we can't have people sleeping here. Well, resiliency, how are you supposed to be resilient if you've been awake for 48 hours? And I understand there's limitations on what people can do. But even closing a center at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, some people aren't even waking up until 3 o'clock. That's my biggest thing. Like people who are using drugs, people who are marginally housed, who are houseless, they're not on a 9 to 5 schedule. And we have to have a place where immediate needs can be met right away. If somebody comes into me, like our outreach phones, like somebody calls and said, I want to go to detox, I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, we're on it. Not that I expect if we had a center or an office to be open those hours, obviously, with permits, and there's limitations about, like how often we can be open, but we want that to be available. We want people to know that this is where we are. You can come in at any point with any crisis, and we're going to be able to adhere to it. We're going to do the best we can to help you. So I think what I'm envisioning is a little bit different than what the city is envisioning. However, there's always room for compromise. And, if it came down to like sharing a space where there could be like even when I mentioned to Mana about having the most basic of syringe service provision, and it was, or just even naloxone. And it seemed like that was a little like a heavy lift. And I was like, this is the reality of what we're seeing. Like, if people are coming in and we're seeing an uptick among, individuals under 35, we're seeing an uptick of HIV. There's something wrong. If we have a syringe exchange right here in town, this shouldn't be happening. So, like, people aren't accessing brick and mortar. So we need to be able to bring it to the people.
Carol. And
Question. For people who, I'm familiar with so-called low threshold programs where there aren't a lot of demands placed on people about, controlling substances or whatever. There's a lot of people out there, I guess, who use some of these programs that I'm aware of that have a lot of co-occurring medical, like diabetes and other, conditions that have to be managed. To what extent so far has your program been able to help people make connections with that will address their medical needs?
Oh, we're wonderful. We spent, years building up a sustainable group of medical providers, nurse practitioners, infectious disease doctors, and also OAT providers. That's one of the things I should have touched upon in the very beginning, is that we have carefully selected an all-star team of local providers that we have built up, not just trust with us being our board of directors and our co-founders and the outreach workers, but among our participants. And like when I was talking about warm handoffs, that's what I mean. We don't just give a referral on a piece of paper. We make sure we follow up the next day, make sure that, because there have been problems. And again, I think it's more on the side of the people we serve, because they've been so institutionalized that they were expecting to walk into a doctor that was going to be condemning and stigmatizing, and they kind of went in with an attitude. And so, we've been able to come in and the other side of that and work as kind of like crisis diffuser in case somebody felt they weren't given the proper provision. And usually 9 times out of 10, it was our participant that said, oh, that was my fault. I went in there with an attitude. Actually, they really did want to help me. So, and it was interesting how you mentioned diabetes, even just connecting to a good doctor, GI doctors, with the amount of Hep C in this area, being able to get somebody into Harvani treatment has been life-changing for so many of our participants. People who were afraid to, who may have tried to procure access Hep C treatment in the late 90s, didn't realize that we have Harvani now. We have Massachusetts, even if you are a person using drugs, we have it in the statute that a doctor must provide medical provision, must provide treatment, where most people who use drugs think that even if they're actively using, a doctor won't see them. So, and we have doctors that think the same. So we've gone in as advocates and said, no, here in Massachusetts, you have to treat somebody. So we've been able to make excellent connections.
That's excellent. Hospitals. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm really passionate about that part, so I got a little repetitive there.
Javier, I'm not sure, was your hand back up for another question? Okay, and then if we have, then Michael. I think I'm seeing Javier, then Michael.
Thank you. Yes, I have 2 questions. The first one is about accountability and community feedback, how that looks like, and how also the decision-making process looks like. That's one question. And the other, it's in relationship to what are the kind of things that keep people from wanting to use existing agencies? Like, is there any example that you can give us?
So I was going to answer the first part because I have a lot of thoughts in the accountability part. For instance, when I mentioned abscesses, we've had people lose limbs because they are treated horrifically in the emergency room right at Cooley Dick. I've had a participant die of endocarditis, which is a heart infection that a lot of injection drug users get, because she had the IV line ripped. She was in withdrawal. She was asking, she didn't want drugs. She, with like anyone, she was in pain. She was in withdrawal because she was seeking medical attention. By every right, she should have been medicated. And they a CNA ripped the line out of her arm and said, "You effing junkie, go out in the street and get what you want." And she was dead 12 days later from the heart infection. So to me, that's a very powerful example. Same, we had somebody call the other night that was kicked out of the shelter because they had their medication on them and had hidden it from the staff. Now, granted, they did break a rule, but we also have it on record that the staff has stolen medication many times. Like medication that people are dependent on. And again, this is word of mouth, but we hear it over and over and over again. Stigmatizing language, even at Tapestry, stigmatizing judgment about the mode of use, whether it be smoking. Like there's people who have procured services asking for crack pipes are told, well, like you're a crackhead, don't come in. Like it's horrific. We've actually heard recordings from ServiceNet, just stigmatizing language. I know that doesn't hold any water. I shouldn't be. I'm actually breaking somebody's confidentiality by talking about that. I shouldn't have said that. But this was a therapist really being totally stigmatizing to somebody who is a mother who uses drugs and telling her she shouldn't have children. And this is someone who's dual diagnosed. And, so like, this was brought to me 2 years ago, and it absolutely shattered me, because here's a woman who is trying to get her life together, who is seeking services, thinks she's in a safe space, and has a therapist telling her she's inherently a bad person because she is using a substance to deal with trauma. So, it's like the same stories over and over. And that's why I said people start to lie. People start to lie and hide out, or leave out key elements of their story, key elements that need to be helped in order to fix them, because they know if they put these key elements out, they'll be shunned or turned away. Even simple things like trying to get into a shelter and admitting that you're dependent on a substance. Of course, the shelters know, but if somebody says, like, I might want to, I've had people not sleep in a shelter because they're afraid of the comments that are made to them when people see their track marks, or the judgment. So we have people sleeping outside rather than getting a bed. I can go on and on and on with the amount, and we keep record of every report that we get that's negative. And even things we've heard about, like when I said about Positive Place, like the amount of people I have who are HIV positive that are trying to access services like housing, like getting furniture for when they do have housing. And, they feel like when they go in, they're being a bother to, and I can honestly say, because I wanted to volunteer there when I first came back to the area. And like I said, I do like the program and I like the people there, but there was a heavy amount of stigma that I felt until I mentioned who I was. And suddenly, like, the faces got very friendly because I'm well known in the HIV world. It was almost like I was bothering them by sitting in their waiting room. So I've experienced it myself.
Jess, I'm so sorry to cut you off. We have one more commissioner that wants to ask a question, and we probably have about 3 or 4 minutes. So this has been very, very valuable. So Michael, if you want to try to work within that time frame, that'll be great.
Yeah. I'll go quickly. Jess, I wanted to ask a little bit of a couple of nuts and bolts question. You had mentioned your kind of blue skying thoughts before about your own space and maybe a van and that sort of thing. But I wonder how many people are, you keep using the phrase we. So I'm wondering how many people are working with HRH 413, and what does the staffing look like to accomplish even greater outreach than what you're doing now?
So we have 16 outreach workers, and 12 of those are stipended, so they are paid. And we do rotating teams. We also have, probably 14 volunteers that work with us. And then there's Albie and myself, who are the co-founders and just work way too many hours that a human should not have to work. But if you're asking like what my blue sky idea, like to staff, because I have, tons and tons of experience doing this, like to staff a basic drop-in, it doesn't take more than like 4 people and maybe 4 good volunteers. So we're blessed with like such amazing volunteers. Like even when we've had a bit of extra funding, our volunteers are like put it back into the program. So, we actually had to force somebody to take payment at one point. Yeah, I mean, of course, bandwidth. Yes, I would love to have, if I had the funding, I would be running double the teams. I would be like, my dream world, we would have like upwards of 40 people doing this work.
Oh.
But unfortunately, we don't have the funding.
Right. Okay, that was it. Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jess, I'm so sorry that I don't see any other hands, but you've been amazing responding to our questions, and I'm so sorry to have to pay attention to the clock, but I want to thank you so much. You're welcome to continue staying with us tonight. And we also have a public hearing coming up on Saturday. So any final words for the commission?
I just want to thank you for hearing me out, and sorry if I was a little discombobulated. Like I said, I'm literally going from motel room to motel room and keep hitting mute. But this means a lot to me, and I'm just glad that there are so many people that actually believe in what we do. And just thank you for giving me an audience tonight. And I apologize to both Cynthia and Dan for not connecting with you over the weekend. But you've been quite gracious. And I'm just going to throw my information up in the chat box because I am going to leave, and I will try to be there on Saturday. But I do have a slew of people still waiting to get into rooms behind me, like literally behind me. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for your work.
Thanks.
Next, just quickly to remind folks that we're having a public hearing on Saturday, and it starts at 11, and it's pretty much going to mirror the process that we've done before, which is a 7-minute time limit for someone to talk or ask us questions, and we are permitted to respond. And we'll take a break every hour, hoping that it won't go too long, but one never knows. So any other, want to make sure that's on everyone's calendar. Any other questions about that? Yeah, Alex.
I wonder if some kind of guidelines or could be put out toward the beginning that encourage people to talk about their own experience and share that experience. Just trying to get away from the issue that we've had that I think has suppressed some participation, which is where people refer back to previous speakers and maybe say things in that I don't know if it's gotten to the level of insulting them or denigrating them, but to just kind of define a line where we think where we can have a respectful dialogue between each other. So I wonder if the co-chairs or others have thought about this, and if there's anything we could say near the beginning or perhaps periodically to encourage more participation.
That's a great point, Alex. Other thoughts about that? I think there could be some ways that we try to frame up, also not knowing what might happen, but yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. Nodding if there's support for that. I think Dan and I can maybe chat about that. Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say we can do, I think we can mirror some of what the city council does, where we ask people to direct their comments to the commission, making sure that it's not, we're not necessarily, even though it's sort of antithetical to a lot of us, we're not facilitating discussion amongst people during the public comment. We want that to be towards us and towards the work that we're doing. So I think just allowing that is what we need to, if we can make statements like that, that are sort of inviting people to, again, refer to us to discuss, their experiences with public safety, concerns that they have, those sort of things. And because the format is still going to be the same, where we take, a 5-minute break each hour. So, you know, when we come back, we sort of re-announce that just in case people maybe came in afterwards.
Sounds good. Thank you for the suggestion, Nick.
I just want to echo what Alex is saying, and I don't think it takes a lot. I think that just at the beginning of each section to remind people about being respectful, and I also agree with Dan that comments should be focused on the commission itself. But just reminding people, I think, is a good start.
Good. Okay. Seeing no other hands, just wanted to move to the the consensus item that we left with last week after a very, very good discussion, and just wanted to propose some additional wording, if you recall. I think, Dan, you're going to put that up in chat, or are you going to put it up on shared screen, or one of those?
I have to dig through all the tabs that I had open.
Yeah, sorry. This is the one on training, and we started with one version, and Namdi kindly gave us another version, and we were talking about training and its efficacy, and had a good discussion about that. So we thought we'd just revise it again. I know Chris mentioned let's take away systemic racism that exists and change it to inherent. So we had some wordsmithing things, but this is just a concept that we're hoping to just get some consensus on, as opposed to the wordsmithing. But we can just give this a go and see how you all think of the language that Dan's going to put up there for us, and giving us a little history. Okay, so sorry to put author names on there. I should have taken those off. But the original wording, when you took the consensus survey, was about training cannot overcome institutional history of systemic racism. We revised that, and now there's a new revision, and just wanted to see if you want to spend a minute or two on that version to see how that sounds, if that should be changed, or if it represents your thinking, our thinking. And if you just want to put your hand up in the tile there, I'm happy to call on you. I'm seeing Chris. Chris.
Yeah, I like Namdi's revision. It's concise, and it has a very positive spin on what we're trying to address here. I like it, especially the bit about may contribute to the reduction of the long-term personal approach to policing if they are a component of a larger initiative that acknowledges systemic inequalities in police departments. There's a sense of hope.
And so just to be clear, that was the one that we discussed last week, actually. I
thought that was an additional revision.
I don't think so, because see that word that exists in the police department, and you wanted to change that to inherit. No worries, it's a little confusing. But thank you, Chris. I mean, other thoughts? Nick is talking to someone, but he's muted, so I'm not sure. Any other raised hands, or Namdi?
Yeah, I can just say that I have no objections either to the second one. Third one's a little wordier, but does not raise any objection. I'm trying to walk that line between wordsmithing
Yep.
So I would say both options 2 and 3 remove the concern I had with implying that like Northampton Police was particularly egregious. I think this one really speaks to the dynamics that we think probably exist and really speak as well to the idea that basically idea being that we don't think that these kind of trainings alone are going to be able to erase the systemic problems wherever they exist, basically. So just want to say I would support either 2 or 3.
Okay, thank you, Namdi. Chris, was your hand still up or a new hand raised there?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to lower it. Sorry about that.
No problem. No worries. Hearing no objections, are we in somewhat of a consensus mode for this this item on training? Okay. Thank you. And I just wanted to, instead of slicing the bologna too thin, we had some other questions that had a yellow response or two, but perhaps in the interest of time, we can move along. The one that I did want to get some reaction to was the one with the highest amount of yellow. And that was, I'll read it for you. Many Northampton residents are reluctant to access services that are offered by social service organizations that we all know. Do we want to have any comment about that at all? We've heard about the reluctance from some of our participants, but we had a 54% yellow, meaning I'm not too sure about saying that or believing that or using that as a point of consensus. So just some thoughts on that, if anyone wants to. Otherwise, we can move along. Yeah, Alex.
My concern was the use of the word many, implying, I guess, maybe a majority, or what does many mean? And is that accurate? There's certainly a number, a percentage, and an important percentage that have concerns, and those are people who are most impacted by policing, and so we certainly need to address those. But I just don't know about my only concern was about the percentage or the number.
So suffice to say that there are people that have told us that these services. Yeah. Okay. Good. Great point. Thank you, Alex. Namdi, I'm not sure your hand's still right. Yes, Namdi.
It's up again. Sorry. Like Alex,
No,
I don't object to the language as it is. I think it's factually correct. I would, along the same lines what Alex is raising, I would like it if our sort of statements like this show that we are aware that there are other segments of the population that probably have a different view, and that I think that our task is essentially how can we come up with a system that really meets everybody's needs. Now, I also like in Alex's comment his point that even if there's a minority of people who have these concerns, that minority happens to be probably the most vulnerable, the most heavily impacted. So I think we can't do this by sort of saying, what's the raw number? The raw number will probably be deceiving, but I would love it if somehow we can say we want to recognize that this is a big tent community with lots of different views, some people who feel perfectly comfortable with status quo and all this. And so how can we, yet we also have to think about this vulnerable group. So I don't object to the current wording, but I just would like it if we can show some understanding that there's probably another group who would have a different view on this. And that our effort is to still try to make sure everybody's safety and everybody's comfort can somehow be addressed. I think that's what we're trying to go for. And the trouble is we've been overlooking the vulnerable. We've been, and this group, and they may be more heavily impacted. So it's kind of like, how can we acknowledge both? So again, I think Alex's concern was that somehow this, by just focusing on what we say in this sentence, we might imply that that's the only group that matters to us. And I hope that isn't the case. Hope everybody matters to us, but that this group that's vulnerable needs the attention because they're vulnerable. It's kind of, playing with both those issues.
Yes, thank you, Namdi. That's a great point. Nick and then Carol.
I don't. I'm not going to say something specific about this. It's a broad statement, and some people are reluctant to access any services. Accessing services is onerous for many people, no matter what. And it's more that there are no alternatives. And we don't know how people would feel about alternatives because well, there are some alternatives, but the alternatives are not nearly as accessible. So it's hard to completely agree with this. If it said something about many people would like other options or something like that, it would be easier for me to be sure of agreeing with it.
Thank you, Nick. Carol?
Would it be possible to add a second sentence there that addresses some of the concerns by the people who really do not want to use these services? Whether it be that stigmatization, not being recognized, not being accurately seen or heard in a respectful way. I mean, we may have to look for the language in some of the testimonies, but I wonder if that would help the sentence that we're talking about. It would give some context, so that to mitigate the tendency of people who are very happy with the services just saying in the community saying, well, what's wrong with them?
Yes, and I think, and Dan helped me out too, I think the consensus questionnaire was about the spirit of something as opposed to the exact wording. And so we hope not to replicate this language. And we probably clunked it up a little bit to sort of force us to do that wordsmithing, but it's more of the fact that people have told us, whether it be access or whether it be the types of services, that they're not the be all end all. And as Nick pointed out, there's also no other options. So if we can agree that it's the spirit of honoring those individuals that told us that, keep that alive in this document or reflected in the final report. Dan, does that sound?
Yeah, so I think it was, in terms of a guiding principle, as far as that, like thinking about, this one is things that we don't want to fall in a trap of just recommending something that already exists, and we don't want it to replicate the things that exist that are in some ways causing issues, whether it's barriers to accessing those things, whether it's perceived issues with clinicians, whether it's past traumatic experience with institutionalized responses, to just be aware that there are those barriers for some people and that we should have them in mind if we're proposing solutions, that we don't want to just instantly replicate those things. It isn't specific. It's not that a majority of people have problems or that there's a significant number, whatever that would be. So I don't think we can make that decision. I think we can find that sort of unreached population, but just the spirit of there are people that don't want to access even the alternatives that do exist at the moment for a variety of reasons, and we should be aware of that, I think, was the spirit there.
So I think if that's acceptable, I want to thank everyone for the discussion and Dan for doing the survey and everyone for taking it. I think it allowed us to see where our points of agreement and where we can move on certain things. So if it's okay with you, I think we've done that. And I think we can move on to the next item, which is the final report, but I do want to leave some time. Does anyone have any more comments about this process? Yellow, red, green. Okay, Nandi.
Sorry, just one. Thank you for all the effort to organize us. I want to just keep saying that I appreciate you, Cynthia, and all Dan leadership who's kind of helped us. So I want to say that. And secondly, I want to say that ultimately, I think we will need to fuss about some of the words. I feel like what I learned from going through this process is that we talk about wordsmithing as if it's trivial. And I think we should just kind of admit that it's probably not trivial, and how these things get phrased in the end will probably matter to all of us. And let's just have in our minds a sense of how is it that we will kind of process the final language so that we get, I mean, what was nice in this process for me is have some confidence that even if we decide to pay great attention to the wording, we can land on wording that I think it shouldn't be too painful to get there, but I think we shouldn't act like it doesn't matter how we phrase something, or that we can kind of get halfway there and it's going to be just okay. I do feel people in this group will have strong feelings about exactly how we phrase something when we get to the final part of it. So let's just have that in mind.
Thank you, Namdi. Javier.
There you are. Yeah, let me sort of figure out how to say this. I think two things. The first one is we're being really intentional with the language. What is written, what was written in the different versions was extremely intentional from the very beginning. And I don't think that we are not thinking about the wording now. We are actually thinking in the wording. I think it's disingenuous to try to equalize like everybody. Everybody suffers, everybody. We are here, and we can go back to the chart of the commission to talk about why we're here. We're not here because everybody in the community is being targeted. We're here not because there is no difference between being white, brown, and black. So it's disingenuous to say the opposite and try to build an argument that we have to almost start where everybody's the same, everybody has the same problems. Let's just start from it. No, that's not where we are. And it's disingenuous to think the opposite. I think the language from the beginning, if the language makes us uncomfortable, that's one thing, right? The other thing is that if it's truthful or not. And so far, every single word, even if it's making us uncomfortable, has been truthful in the document that was presented from the very beginning by Cynthia and Dan. I want to be really clear about that. So if we're not able to recognize how uncomfortable that makes it, that's one thing. If we're going to recognize that we are here because specific groups are being targeted and criminalized, that's different. That's something that people are going to need to work. But right now, I just want to make clear that we are taking serious the language right now, from the very beginning, from the last meetings, from the time that this was presented to us. If somebody feels uncomfortable with that, that's different. But let's not say that we're not thinking about language, because I support the language from the very beginning that was presented, in spite of people feeling uncomfortable, because it's not my responsibility to have to deal with somebody feeling uncomfortable because of reality.
Thank you, Javier. Dan?
Yeah, so I'll make this one quick, honestly, because it sort of ties in with the next topic as well. But I think for what we were doing with consensus, that's sort of getting everyone, finding out if everyone's sort of heading, are we all facing the same direction? So that's where that agree with the spirit comes in. The next part of this is actually writing down what we're recommending, why we're recommending it. And that part is going to be a lot of that wordsmithing. And that's because it's got to go out to everyone and be sort of understood by the city councilors, by the mayor, and by the people of Northampton that have to sort of deal with all of these things too, and wrestle with what we're going to recommend. And so I think that's where a lot of that wordsmithing is going to come in, and that's going to be sort of nitpicking. And I really want us to do that a lot, to make sure that the recommendations that we're making are as strong as they can be, but are as worded as confidently as we can make them as well. So that's where it's looking at really, which verb is the right verb, which adjective do we want here, and really making those super targeted. Because as I'm sure everyone is aware, we have about 2 weeks to go, which is a horrifying number. When this started, it seemed like we had all the time in the world, and now I feel like I'm, back in grad school thinking about writing a paper, days before it's due. But that's where, it's going to be important for us to get drafts shared with people so that we can start to make comments. And then, we are in this place where we're limited in the number of ways that we can interact and provide feedback to one another as well. So we have to be conscious of that. So what I kind of like to do is transition to our next topic, which is the final report drafting, joint meetings, and discussion of some of the topics that we have. So just to do a real quick check, does anyone have anything else to say before we move on? So just on the points of agreement that we have sort of as we're drafting this. Okay. So I think we're going to have to do, and I think this is important, one of the reasons why we wanted to do the sort of red light, yellow light, keeping those yellow lights in mind. When we meet to talk about these, and when we meet to, so we've asked, or we started doing some joint subcommittee meetings. I think those are really useful. And when I say starting to, I mean we have our first one tomorrow. Just so everyone is aware, for joint subcommittees, because we're towing that line of almost meeting quorum for the full commission with the combination of two subcommittees, we need to, if you want to have a joint meeting across subcommittees, it needs to be listed both as a joint meeting for each subcommittee, and it needs to be listed as a full commission, so that if there was another commissioner that attended, you wouldn't hit quorum and then we would be out of compliance. So it's another step. It's fine, we can do that. We do have one listed for tomorrow, so that the alternatives to policing and the spending and subcontracts committee can meet. So if anybody wants to do those meetings, just let myself or Cynthia know. We'll let Noah know. The same rules apply, so it has to be posted at least 2 days before that meeting occurs. So we want to get those in. But that's a chance to sort of cross-pollinate and do some of these collaborative writing and steps there. Subcommittees could also designate one person to be their writer and write and bring back and report. And then do editing in that subcommittee as well. But what we're looking at is, and this is a short timeline, but to have a really rough draft of recommendations, a super rough draft by the 5th, so 3 days from now, having a rough draft of the recommendations that you're thinking of, and then Cynthia and I will work over the weekend, smash that together and sort of structure it a little bit so that the document itself is coherent. And I think we'll also have, this is a great place to put where there are pieces of tension that you might want to discuss, where people don't necessarily agree in the subcommittee, so that we can sort of also understand what those tensions are and do some of that wordsmithing to make sure that it's actually set. We will get that to people so that we can discuss it, we can work on it. And what we would propose is that we have a meeting on the 9th of next week. We'd also propose having a meeting on the 12th of next week. So that's a chance for you all to read the draft that we have, make notes, and send those to us so that we can also discuss and then do a live editing. I know that sounds onerous to do live editing with 15 people, but it's really what we need to do in order to make sure that on the 16th, which is our last sort of scheduled commission meeting, that we have a chance to look at that as a group for those final recommendations and final revisions. And then ideally we would get this to the city council before the 18th, but we would present on the 18th. That's when it's due. Which is a lot. But again, thinking about, we really want a chance to make this structured so that it presents, an action plan of, what we're recommending, why we're recommending it, what might be needed, what are the sort of challenge and opportunities, what are those pain points if we want to identify those, and then also start to build out that appendix or appendices with information as well. Wow, nobody has a face of panic like I feel. All right, Booker. Oh, I can see you, but we can't hear you.
You're muted.
No, he's oh, you were unmuted, Booker, but we still couldn't hear you. Wonder if maybe there's a loose connection, maybe. No, I can see. Oh, you can hear a click there.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, there we go.
We met on the alternatives committee, except for Javier, met on Monday to try to start word crafting. I think we ought to ask if what we're trying to do with our word craft fits into the way you're thinking about how this should all work. And let me be more specific. We're using the document that you sent out. It would take me a while to pull it back up again, which was the large formatting for how the whole report might look. We are recommending alternatives for a number of topics that we're going to present in a short form that will fit into the alternatives sort of underneath, here's what we think should happen, with much larger groups of appendices to support or give reference to why this is happening. So it's almost like we're giving you an executive summary of each of the issues that, for instance, we're suggesting for alternatives that fit into one aspect, and then a lot of information, paragraphs and pages for why each thing that will go into an appendix. Is that still the way you would like this to appear?
Yeah, so I sort of imagine this, I'll speak for myself, but then I'll let Cynthia go. As we were working on this and thinking about it and looking at all of the other, types of reports in the way, sort of organizing things by topic and having enough information that you can grasp what the recommendation is and why in a short space, and having that presented in a way that's very clear and sort of accessible in terms of language. And then, further on explaining all of the detail, I think is a great way to go. And I would expect the same thing sort of from policies as well. And I would say that our report might have things organized in terms of like topics, but I don't see our final report having like an alternatives topic and like a policies topic. I think we're going to interweave these things because they do speak to a larger whole, in terms of a vision. At least for me, one of the things that I think of, and I think we've all sort of identified this, is like in terms of making a compelling, argument, you have to sort of present this as holistic. We don't necessarily want it to be, well, you can do one of these 5 things and 2 of these 3 things and then move forward. That we want to say this is the end goal and present. And I think the alternatives, you've all talked about sort of phased approaches. And I think we can include that either, explicitly building out phases, or to say, okay, here's an opportunity for a phased approach, and this is what it might look like with this piece and with this piece. So some different opportunities there. And I'm pretty open. I think the biggest concern that I have is that it's still that I would like it to honor all of the people who are authoring and who are doing all of the work for this. To make sure that it fits with their understandings and their thoughts, but that it does read as though it was intentionally structured in that way.
I have another question then. I think in the background of how, at least I'm thinking about how all of this will work, is whether we're also going to propose a department, a new department, a Department of Safety or some name. I'm not sure where in our process that recommendation will come from.
Yeah. So
I'm purposely stopping there because I don't know.
Yeah. So I'll answer and then go to Namdi as well. I think for myself, I think we've seen this come up quite a bit across the subcommittees. And I think we've seen it. It's also been proposed a lot in other communities, especially for a city like Northampton that doesn't have like a Department of Social Services already. I think this is something that the commission can recommend as a whole. I think we'll need to spend, a little bit still figuring out what this department looks like. And that's why we had sent that initial document to sort of get, sort of prime that thought process. Because one of the things that I've noticed, I've sort of, been watching and listening to all the different things, is that for a lot of the recommendations we have, there's got to be somewhere for those recommendations to sit. Even if they're policies, so thinking about like some of like the oversight committees and ways to add, ways to include sort of I'm blanking on, sorry, but ways to include like accountability, ways to improve complaint processes, to take them outside of the police department. They still have to live somewhere. And so, a new department might, or I would propose that a new department is that sort of solution. So I would say yes. I'm still trying to draft out my own, like, what does this department do? And I think attaching it to a phased approach is probably the right way, because the department's got to grow and build. There's actually a really interesting like department calculator that I found that sort of looks at like what do you need to consider when you're building out a department. So just thinking about like what that would cost or what that would phase, so we could propose or give them some guidelines about what it might cost, I think is going to be useful. I'm still trying to dig through it all. But I think that can come from the whole commission, and we can put that as like recommendation 1 is a new department, and then our flow of recommendations are going to be, this is what it could do, and here are some of the other, and then here's what we might recommend for this department in terms of policies, and also for other existing departments too. Does that make a logical flow or answer? Okay. So we'll move on to Namdi and then Nick.
Yeah, hi. My only comment is to remind you that we had discussed trying to include the voices of commissioners who have left us. And I'd like it if in our process we think about how that would happen. My take on this is that maybe right now will be a time to maybe ask those folks if they have something they'd like to submit for the report for incorporation, they could do so. I think the challenge for us is if you haven't been here every step of the process, sort of having a full co-author responsibility is probably not fair. On the other hand, having invested some and also bringing certain voices we've said are missing, women of color, certain things we specifically said we wanted to have, and women in general, to have that back would be great. So I guess, what does it look like? Is it an appendix that's put at the end of the report, or is there some kind of submission that's done while we're writing the final draft and there's a way to incorporate it? But I think this is the moment to kind of maybe discuss a little bit, like how should we include the voices of people who are part of our group and have left us? I don't want to, I just think it's important that it happen, and maybe we should kind of just state how it's going to happen. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So Cynthia, I saw your hand go up. Did you want to answer that one, or are you something else?
Yeah, if I can answer that, and I know, Nick, I'm jumping ahead of you, but we'll get you there. I think it's, well, Dan and I have talked about this. It's really important to recognize and acknowledge also what we've gone through and the people who have left us. And so there's opportunity in the appendix And some have suggested that maybe we write personal narratives, not a requirement, but just what this process was for you. And I think it's important that the city council and the mayor know that this was taken seriously and people did go on different transformational paths and spectrums during this process. So, and that includes those who left us. And it would be great if we could hear from them. And this is just meant to be one of those things in the appendix that illustrates our process was true to us, and we wanted to show that we took it seriously. And the other piece to that is we want to document every single person that we talked to or came to talk to us, that we asked them to come. So again, I would ask the chairs to give us those names, those titles of people, so that we can show that.
All right, thank you. So we have Nick and then Carol. Yep, there we go. Okay, so Nick and then Carol.
I have a couple of things. Dan, when you say we want to honor all of the people who are authoring this, and Cynthia, you're talking about honoring the people who have contributed, and all of the names, are we talking about every public hearing, or I'm just not quite sure what you mean. Who do you mean by all of the people? People we had come and speak to us, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, Dan and I have talked about sprinkling these public hearing comments throughout the report, somewhat like the Brattleboro report. But yeah, we're looking for the actual names of individuals, the organizations they represented, not
and
public
references.
comment.
And referring to them as we write
yeah.
the report. I get it. Okay, that's clear. So I want to just say I'm a little bit vague, and I want to express my incredible appreciation to you in particular, Dan, for holding so much of the anxiety. I think there is a lot of worry about how are we going to do this, but I'm not entirely clear, and I feel like that consensus discussion was very helpful. It really, and the consensus was rooted in the principles. The questions were largely basic principles and fundamental understandings about our project. I feel like we could use a similar process, or I don't know what process is going to happen, for writing the final report and the final recommendations. I feel like it might be helpful to have a consensus list as we write the final report. And because as certain individuals will be doing the majority of the writing, and I feel like questions are going to come up about, well, we think we know where everybody stands on this, but it would be good to have some very specific discussion. And I just want to say I'm a little bit unclear how we know what our consensus is for our recommendations. I feel like we've done a good job for our values and principles. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, because we don't have a list of everything, I think it's hard to sort of produce that. So I think one of the ways that we'll work on that getting consensus is going to be through looking at the draft and making comments of that. So as people are drafting things, as things get submitted, and as Cynthia and I start to put them into a structure, not necessarily changing any language as we're doing it, it's going to be sort of discussing those, going through that document. I would very much imagine that the entirety of our next meeting will be going through that document and sort of discussing the things that we want to see changed, or the points that we want to discuss as a group, and that continuing for the next 3 meetings, really, the 6th, the 9th, 12th, and then our final on the 16th as well. That last, every I is dotted, every T is crossed. So I think as subcommittees meet. I think it's going to be important to sort of draft, work with the language that people do agree with, or that some people agree with, and leave it. If you wanted to note it in the text itself to say there's disagreement here, strong disagreement, light disagreement, I think that's going to be good. But as you're drafting those out, to keep the spirit of what we have, and again, for everyone to be ready to have more of that productive disagreement as we edit this. Does that make sense?
Just to respond, it does make sense. I like what you're saying. I really want to express my appreciation for how you're going about this. It might help as writers draft if there are points which the writers say, it would be good to have a little bit of clarification on agreement on this issue, just, yellow highlights, or just so when we sit down at our next meeting, we know where we want to focus our energies. But yeah, you answered my question.
Okay. And then Carol, you had a question?
Not a question, a comment. There was what I was finding helpful a week ago, and I'm just throw this out as an idea, not to give fellow commissioners more work to do before next week. We've got plenty of work to do. But I find when I'm part of a body that's going to come into consensus or make some decision, that it's helpful for me to actually write a small reflection, actually type out for myself a small reflection on how I felt or what I thought about these underlying questions about reimagining policing or reimagining public safety, basically, in the city. How I felt when I came in, what happened, like what was input that was influential on me, and where do I stand right now? Like, what are my real bottom lines that I want, that I hope will be expressed in that final report. And so I wrote myself a reflection, and am happy to share it with anyone who is interested in it, because it was helpful for me, so that when we get to this final consensus building stage, I don't need to be reactive against someone else's idea that is put out and say, no, I don't agree with that. Because I know now, after writing my reflection, where I'm open to just saying, I'm going to go with the flow with what most people think about these recommendations. And then I know what my bottom lines are, where I really want language in, it was a clarifying process for me. And I encourage other people to do that. If you're the kind of person who processes in journaling or whatever, it's just been helpful for me, because I could see in it, it's only like what, 1 or 2 pages. I can see in it how I was influenced by the public hearings, how I was influenced by the public comments, how I was influenced by the reading that we've all done, and the videos we looked at of other programs, and how it actually shifted me. So I just put that out as something helpful. If you can process that way, it might help us all, like next week.
All right, thank you, Carol. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns that people want to have before we move on to the next, which is just report back from the subcommittees? Cynthia?
Just wanted to make sure we would have a quorum if we added an additional meeting next Friday. So that's what we're proposing, an additional meeting. So the date was 3/12. Is that right, Dan? Yeah.
Yep.
Does anyone feel they can't make it, or?
My question was actually pretty much the same. What time? Is it the standard 6 to 8 time that you're thinking?
Yeah, I was gonna say pretty much, but leaving it open, if people needed it to be later or earlier. I also realize you thinking about it. So you and Michael probably have a city council meeting.
That's on Thursday.
Okay.
Or no, we don't have a city council meeting. It's on. No, never mind. No,
Okay.
and we're talking on a Friday at the 12th, right?
Yes.
Okay. So no, there'll be no, I am busy starting at 7. But I'm happy for as long as there's quorum to leave at that point.
Carol, did you have your hand up still, or?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could shift that to an earlier, like a 5 to 7 window. So that the evening, I mean, if that's usually family night. So that we would have an evening after that.
I lost my family already.
That's one of the things that happened by virtue of this process. I'm so sorry, Booker.
Yeah, I know Josie just said they would be late if it was 6 to 8. So I'm wondering if they might not be able to make it. And then David, I'm also recognizing that you might be out of town. So Josie, what would happen? Excuse me, sorry, what would happen if this was like 5 to 8 or 5 to 7? Would you be able to make any of that?
Yeah, I would be cutting it a little bit. Yeah, I would be able to make it. I'd probably be a little bit past 6. I gotta leave the school and then go to Westfield to sign some contractual paperwork after a long school day, and then drive back up to Northampton. So I might be a little bit late, but I'd definitely be able to make what I would assume is most of it.
Okay, so in that case, propose 5 to 8 on Friday, March 12th, for a second commission meeting of that week, which would be addressing comments and concerns, revisions, really doing the wordsmithing that Namdi was talking about before, to make sure that we're accurately representing where we are as a commission in what we're recommending. Alex?
Dan, did you mean 5 to 8? So a 3-hour meeting?
No, sorry, 5 to 7.
5 to 7. Okay.
Gonna put this as a 2-hour option, trying to keep it, in the spirit, as Cynthia noted a long time ago, of not having long meetings that drag on and kill us all. So keep the energy up. High energy meeting for 2 hours. All right, and so all right, great. And we talked about having the option to do a self-narrative in there. Perfect. Okay. So at this point, I would say we'll move on to the next component, which is going to be reporting back from the subcommittees. So to start with the alternatives subcommittee, do you have anything to report back?
I think the only thing is we are spending time beginning to figure out which of us are crafting which aspects of the documents we're going to be turning into you. And that was the meeting on Monday. If we could, I would like, if it's possible, to share sort of what we're hoping to have occur in the joint meeting that's going to occur tomorrow night. Is it okay if we bring that up right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, did you want me to do it, or did you want to go through?
Yeah, yes, I would like you to do it. But before I say that, Alex, Carol, Javier, do you have any other comments from our committee? Yeah, please, Dan.
Okay, so we have the first joint committee meeting, and it's between the alternatives and the spending subcommittees. For the most part, for the spending and contracts, a lot of what we do, or a lot of what we have as work, we've done a lot to understand the budget and things, but we're sort of reactive in that our recommendations really depend on, or what we can say and what we bring to the table really depends on what we're recommending as a commission. And so what we'd like to do is sort of get a little bit of a fuller idea of what recommendations people are making, so we can start to sort of address how much is this going to cost, or what contracts might need to be renegotiated, or where's the city going to be in terms of, so, you know, David had brought this up before, was like, or maybe it wasn't David. No, it wasn't David, it was Namdi, and David answered a little bit, but like, what's the liability like if you have a new department for the city? And so for us to be able to sort of investigate that a little bit, we've got to know, so that we can contribute something back to the group. So that's really what we're sort of going to go with, and sort of this way we can sharpen what we think we've got for information, or what we might need to do a little more digging in, as well as, you know, avenues for what, you know, how this might be funded. So that will be tomorrow from, I think, 6:30 to 8:30, but I could be wrong. I don't have the agendas up in front of me for the rest of the meetings, but it is up on the city website. Alex is giving me a thumbs up, and Noah is as well. So I'm going to say, great, it's 6:30 to 8:30 for folks. And Noah did send the link with that as well.
So I'm just curious if Javier, Alex, or Carol have other questions about that in terms of thinking and preparation for the time. So this a little bit. Carol?
So yeah, so some of the proposals that are likely coming out of the alternatives subcommittee will be kind of definitive program development, and other recommendations may be for further study, all of which is going to cost money. It's not going to be just like a direct transfer out of policing into something, you know, equals, you know, the same budget. So how, given that so many of these programs around the country that have just launched really don't know what their budgets are, I mean, how are you guys on spending and contract looking for figures here? Projected figures? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds to respect time, but
yeah, right.
Yeah, so we've done a lot. We've looked at contracts. We've tried, you know, our best to sort of understand what the city already just spends on mental health through the police department, and things like that, using their logs, using the salaries that they have, looking at the number of calls in, and then how they're coded by the police afterwards, and the hours that they spend, or say they spend on different activities, with the recognition that the logs that they keep, and the chief has said this, the logs that they keep are actually really inaccurate. They're not going to give us a great, but at least it's a rough estimate for that. The other part of this is looking at what other groups have done across the country, especially looking in smaller contexts, both on what they're recommending and what they're looking at spending, and the larger context of what they are, if you take Ithaca as an example, where they're redoing their entire public safety as one brand new department that includes police, fire, EMS, and all these other things, but like looking at how they're structuring pay, how they're structuring that department, what the, all of those sort of things. So it's really just trying to be as helpful as we can, so that our recommendations have, somewhere for the city council to look and for the mayor to look at some point. But it's not saying, exactly, you are going to spend exactly $300,000 and and then this thing is going to be $412.18, every month. Like, we're not getting that specific, but just to look for how much funding might you need and where that might come from as well. Did you have anything else from the alternatives? All right, seeing a no. So the next is the policies and services.
Namdi, I'm going to start it off if you want to add something, but I want to say, I want to say that what we're doing in policies and services is almost integral to what your joint committee is going to be discussing tomorrow night, and joint subcommittee. And that is, if you're trying to figure out a budget, you need to know what services you're budgeting for. And the Policies and Services Subcommittee has really reviewed not 100%, but as much as we could, the range of services and work that that is done by the police department. And we've reviewed all of those services and categorized them in terms of what things could be done must be done by police, what things really could be done by a joint venture, collaboratively or cooperatively, by police and an alternative, and what things could be picked up by an alternative department. And I'd like to submit, I don't know how I do this, but I'd like to submit to the full commission tonight the breakdown that we've put together, which I think would be helpful.
Nick, you're muted.
Oh yeah, I let go of it. I'm sorry. It would be helpful in your work tomorrow night to have something like this available. You may not agree with it, but it's a general breakdown and a beginning. We discussed this list at pretty much at length, and a lot of it, the way it breaks down, will depend on what new services get developed. So I just want to make sure this is available to all of you, and it is central to the work that the Policies and Services Committee is doing. Subcommittee members, do you want to add anything? David, Cynthia, and Namdi?
Yeah, I'll just add that this list has 3 categories of services, and one, our group, after much discussion, decided we thought would, in our view, require some either full police or police doing the primary response. And this is important because I think this is a group of things that should be scrutinized by the alternative group and everybody else who's kind of more leaning in the abolish direction, to see if you really want to make a case that anything on this list doesn't require police at all, because I think that may be areas of controversy. Beyond that, we have a second category, which is where we saw some kind of joint response between the police and some other kind of entity that would be this kind of new, the new things that are being imagined. And again, that second group would depend a lot on what this new alternatives that are being proposed would look like, and their capabilities, their training. But we as a group, as a subcommittee, conceded or felt that police don't need to have the lead role in the things in the second category. And then the third category, we really imagine police can be taken out of it, almost altogether. And those would be things that, again, a new committee could kind of take, a new organization within the city could take on. So I think the great value here is to see, kind of as other subcommittees look at this, do you find yourself in agreement that with this general structure? And if you don't, what particular kinds of functions you think we still could take out of the police hands, or you think should be put back in police hands? Because again, I think this is where we're going to probably end up finding ourselves in some discussions. That's what I'll add.
Just really quickly for folks, you should have got this as a document from Noah this afternoon as well. I'm sharing it now, but it should be available to everyone.
Great, thank you. And I apologize, that's not viscous dogs, it's vicious dogs.
Typos are allowed at this stage.
Josie?
Yeah, Namdi, it sounded at some point as if you had a question for people who tended to lean more abolitionist, and I just wanted to make sure that I heard it correctly.
Sure, sorry. What I would say is that our subcommittee has now listed some things that we imagine, that we have a hard time imagining how these fun things would happen in Northampton without some kind of police, or police having the primary role. So I think that would be a particular interesting list for the abolitionist folks to scrutinize and say, yeah, that you actually do want to make the case that even these things could proceed without police involvement. And then, I guess down the road, you probably should sort of tell us or somebody how you would replace some of these things. And I don't know, this isn't the place to, in our limited time, to go into the details, I don't think, but I just wanted to direct you to a place to look, because, but what you'll see is in the rest of the document, we as I guess what the thing to see in our list is, I think you'll see that there's a set of things that we as a subcommittee feel really comfortable shouldn't be in the hands of police. So you will see that our subcommittee would be behind, I guess, an abolitionist view that at least these functions should be taken away. And that means a really supportive take on that, on I think the abolitionist position on those items. And then there are the hybrid items, which I think people are sort of imagining that the police would have some role. They might be hanging back, waiting to be called in, like if a mental health person asked them to, or some other kind of role, but we had a hard time imagining them totally absent in some circumstances. And so we had them kind of in a backup role for item 2. Anyway, so that's what I was trying to say, Joseph.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to, with respect to time, unless people, I just have a minute's worth of things to just kind of just touch on that real quick, if you would allow me. Just curious.
Chair's okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is just the update. So as long as we keep it super, super short.
Yeah. So I'm not speaking to you directly, Namdi. When I use you here, I'm using the plural you. English lacks many uses of them. Anyway, if most people who are not super well versed within abolitionist kind of ideology or kind of working, when we talk about abolition, it's kind of more of a hyper idealized end goal, right? It's not something that happens overnight. And so I haven't given it a super close look, but for some of the things at the top in the first portion of the thing, I would agree that there needs to be at least some level of police presence taking on full responsibilities. Like, we're not going to send social workers into a hostage situation, for example, right? I even as an abolitionist, see the need for police in some really niche circumstances. But yeah, that just to be clear, even though they are called abolitionists, it is a process, and it is an end goal very far down the line, with a real focus on making sure that we change the material conditions of people as soon as possible who are the most impacted. But that's all I wanted to kind of clarify.
All right, so Booker, and then we'll move on to the next.
Okay.
This is a really useful, I happened to be in the meeting while this was being discussed, and I thought it was very useful. Do you have data about how often the Northampton police are called for the kinds of things that we would say require their presence? Because, for instance, I don't think there've been, I have no argument with anything here. But are these all sort of rare events in Northampton? It's like Mike going on to the radio show and saying, there hasn't been a Northampton police officer never pulled a gun and killed somebody with a mental health response issue, which I'm really glad is true. But I'm not sure that, I think those are rare events. So this gets at how many police do you need to do these kinds of things?
Can I say something? I could compare this to the call list that they gave us early on. It would be a very, very rough comparison. It would not be exact. The problem is that when they get called, the reason they get called and what is actually going on may be very different. So the call list doesn't always reflect what was happening. It might look like a criminal thing, but it's a mental health thing. It maybe look like a medical thing. It's a drug thing. It's or the opposite. So but I could do a rough breakdown just to do I'll do a rough breakdown to see if I can see what some of the numbers look like. But I don't think we're going to get exact numbers.
Nick, just to support you, so in the spending contracts, we already tried to do that, just to look at like what we actually spent, like what we're spending on these different things. The national average is about 5% of the things. We don't have enough granularity to like do like a, you know, exactly like certain crimes, like what's the difference between assault versus like aggravated assault. And things like that. But when we did it, even accounting for just all assaults being like the highest category, all of the things being like the worst that we could, it still ends up being about 4%.
So when I first went over the list, if I did just mental health, I came out with 4 or 5%. But if I did all of the behavioral and non-criminal, just odd things happening on the street, it came out to close to 20%, which is very, very similar to what we hear is happening across the country. So I'm just saying, you're right. I agree, Dan, and thank you it is hard to come up with any kind of exact numbers, but I'm still curious to see what the numbers will look like.
Yeah, I can share that with you. We have that sort of already built out in the graphs and sort of.
Okay, great.
So I just add to this, in much the same way that we need a policing system that is responsive and sensitive to the minority and most vulnerable people in our population, we need a policing system able to respond to rare events. So we shouldn't get distracted by what's common as necessarily the arbiter of what we need to have, although it's a relevant variable, but not the prevailing one. Otherwise, we would build a police system that caters to the majority white population and, you know, only to deal with the minor crimes that are mostly part of Northampton. But I think we're trying to have some flexibility in our system.
Yeah, okay. So just in the interest of time, these are really good discussions and we should continue them, especially as we get to those sort of recommendations and thinking about, you know, recommendations about staffing and things like that. But at this point, I'd like to move us on to the outreach updates and then updates from the spending and contracts.
Sure. So we met yesterday. Yeah. So we have deployed the hard copy and the online form. So far, we haven't gotten any testimony. Hopefully the full commission is going to be a little more proactive deploying the form that we created. There is a hard copy that you can download from the website, from the Northampton City website. Also, there in the same website, it's the online form. You just go to the Northampton City website. You go to government. You go to all the way down the list to the Northampton Police Review Commission, and then you find the form. If you need something like written down, I can shoot you an email if you let me know, whoever needs it, with the sort of short explanation of how to get there. I met with Sean Donovan, and I'm gonna be trying to either to be able to reach out to the folks that he reached out and he has shared so far their testimonies, so we can add it to our system. And if they are comfortable doing that, or if you're comfortable sharing the testimony that they already have shared with Sean. So we're talking about that. Hopefully that's going to depend in Sean getting in touch with those who gave that testimony and getting their permission. So a huge ask from the outreach subcommittee is that if anybody here, anybody from the commissioners has contact with affected communities, please do your outreach, send a copy of the form, talk to people about it, post it on your Facebook, and let's try to get the word out.
All right, and we did send it to city councilors to distribute as well, and to the Gazette. So hopefully they'll be getting that. Really quick, Alex, and then we'll jump along.
Great, thank you. I know Noah's been working on this, and I know that you don't have control over the city website, but the link to the form is still not available on our main page, so that you have to find it in these two disparate ways. And so it just another call, and we've heard requests from the community for that to happen, for that to be able to be found. So just another call. I don't know if there's any way IT can do that, but just that concern.
Yeah, I would love to spend like a year just redoing the entire city website, like just throwing it out there someday. But yeah, we'll still keep working on that. Anything else before we go to spending and contracts? Okay.
Yeah. So spending and contracts, kind of like how Dan mentioned a lot of really great things earlier about what we've been doing lately. And to his point, we are, at the end of the day, a very reactionary type subcommittee. But what we've been looking at lately are kind of what are the potential bargaining chips in order to get some of these changes done in terms of policing contract and what is on the negotiating table next time round. We've discussed things such as potential hiring freezes, potential raise freezes, position freezes, and all those other fun type of contractual things that can be negotiated. Of course, a lot of these has to do with the city making the push for it and helping, facilitate that with the police department, but also the police unions writ large to kind of contribute to that conversation. So really kind of getting to the nitty gritty of the contracts is what we've been up to lately. Besides that, of course, there is the joint committee tomorrow that hopefully people sit down on, because I imagine that a lot of really awesome putting kind of muscle to the bones of this process come together tomorrow and in the meetings to come. But that is pretty much it. Does anyone on the commission subcommittee want to say anything else?
I would just open it back up to Booker. I saw you raise your hand right as Josie was speaking.
Yeah, I see this as sort of connected. As I said, I sat in on Nick's meeting, and the reason I sat in is because they had a person from CSO, I'm forgetting the abbreviation, came and spoke with them about sort of how mental health calls are being done now, and that's a huge part of what we're about to recommend from the Alternatives Committee. I went away from that discussion with a depressed feeling about sort of trying to make recommendations for a non-police presence crisis intervention call. I'm just curious if other members of that committee felt the same way afterwards or not. By the way, I need to say to the Alternatives Committee to watch the tape of that meeting and watch the tape of that interview, because it was for me sobering. And I'm just curious of others who were involved with that, what they thought. Maybe, if you don't mind, Nick, can I ask you to summarize what we heard?
Well, one, I can't summarize it because because I know it from the inside. But one thing that Jenny said that kind of stood out for me was that when responding to certain mental health situations, clinical skills are a limited tool in responding. That she said that they only work so far, and then there are mental health states that are not amenable to the kind of work that the clinicians do. And then if there is anything dangerous or destructive going on, that they feel that they really have to have a close collaboration with the police. Does that capture it, Booker?
Well, actually, I was more depressed than that. I actually heard it as a lot of their calls are from the police. There's no mental health person there. They're actually getting calls from the police of saying, can we section 12 this person? And if they're told, no, we don't think this is a section 12, it wasn't clear to me that a mental health provider got involved at that point or what happened with the call. I actually do think there's a training issue involved, but when I listened to that discussion, it made, I think, what we are going to recommend complicated and difficult. And like, I didn't feel like it would be possible to have buy-in from our current alternative, from our current mental health agencies to be able to champion the kind of change we're thinking about. Have I overstated that, Nick? Or
I think that the crisis program would be glad to work with a team that could go in there. But I think what Jenny was saying is there are certain situations that she feels require the police, whether it's an alternative or the crisis team, that the police need to be part of it. And she also is trying to expand their ability to go out with the police. She said they're actually applying for a grant to do that, but from the state. But I don't see the crisis team as not being able to work with an outreach program that could provide peers and alternatives and go to more than just mental health issues, address more than just look at the whole picture. So I guess I didn't see it quite the same way.
Okay. So this is a really great discussion. I want to interrupt it, but we're also over time, and I think this is going to be substantive. It might be good if folks can make it to tomorrow night's meeting, even though it is a joint commission meeting for the alternatives and the spending. It is open to all members of the commission because we listed it as a commission meeting. So it might be good to have this discussion during that time again as we flesh out some of those recommendations. I want to hit David, and then we'll end this phase.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the clock too, so I'm going to be very, very brief. Booker, I had three reactions to it. First, I was glad to hear that the Northampton Police, actually more than other departments, do call social workers to ask, should we section this guy? I thought that was, I was glad to hear that. I guess the thing that was most disappointing to me, not disappointing, but I guess I'm feeling now that there may be fewer situations than I had hoped where police can be left out completely. It just seemed after listening to her that for a majority of calls, they would want maybe not, police right beside them, but available. And the last reaction I had was that we really need to look carefully at Cahoots and other programs to see how they make this work. Because unlike traffic, which we've talked about, which is kind of brave new world, people have been doing this in the mental health community around the country, and we need to look at those programs carefully to see how they work. That's all.
All right, awesome. So yeah, so I think because we moved a little bit away from updates and went into discussions, I think we can continue this discussion again tomorrow too to sort of flesh those out and talk about it. I know the alternatives subcommittees looked at a lot of different models for these type of responses and sort of how they work. So with that, we are set. So I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I move.
All right, so we've
Seconded.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Noah, can you count us through?
Yeah. Let me scroll back up here. Okay. Booker,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael. Oh, Michael is gone. Josie,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Carol is gone. Chris, I think, just left. And Elizabeth is not here. Okay. You're adjourned.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. See some folks tomorrow, other folks soon after. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye.